Hello and share. Hello. Today I wanted to talk about what it is to be a witch in the IDF, uh, the Israeli Defense Force. We just call it in Hebrew Tzahal. So if I call it Tzahal, Tzva Hagana Israel, which basically means Israeli Defensive Force, then forgive me. You'll understand what it means. So anyway, as not many of you that watches me know about how things are going on in Israel. We are basically, the one last civilization stop before we get into the real weird Mediterranean and Arabia and everything. And this is the most American place between here and the other places that is not strictly crazily religious and has Sharia laws and everything. And this country is basically surrounded by enemies. Now, don't judge me, I didn't make the choice of moving in here and living here and make a country here. Those are the choice of my ancestors that have this country by right of conquest and by the right of financially buying some lands here. I'm not saying that we have been perfect, I'm not saying we haven't been perfect, but anyway, staying here was never my choice, and I don't really have any citizenship to any other place in the world, so I have no different country. Anyway, serving in the army in Israel is mandatory. Almost 80% from the money that this country makes going to defense for obvious reasons. So the army is a big business here, and it's not uncommon to see soldiers sitting on the bus, even armed soldiers sitting on the bus with all sorts of weapons. And unless you had a very different childhood and upbringing here, for instance, you were raised Haredi or you are crazy, you will go and serve somewhat in the Israeli army. When you are 18, when you are 17, you're getting, the first summons to go to the army. You go through all sorts of psychological and physical tests. For instance, they check the boys' testicles, and they sit us with women that interviews us to see our control in the Hebrew language, for instance, and things like that. And then we get, if we need, we get a second summons, and the third summons, or later we get into the boot camp. Now, it's not as bad as one would think, because once you are part of the army, first of all, because everybody goes, the army boot camp is kind of friendly. Okay, only really, really, really misfitted people, or people that could absolutely abhor any kind of authority over them. Only those will have difficulty there. But basically, when you go out and work, when you go out to work, you're going to have your boss, and he's going to be the authority above you. So it's basically the same. So if one knows the rules and follows the rules, and even if one slightly bend the rules, most of the time you're not going to get into too much trouble, especially if you are pale-skinned male of any whatever. So before I went to the army, when I went through the processes, I really didn't want to go to the army, okay? Once I was 15, 16, I was already a full-fledged witch. I was pagan. The army didn't hold any values that I wanted. And I wanted to go, and not be in the army using the psychology card or something else, because, the Israeli army does not acknowledge any other religion besides the main three monotheistic religion plus the Druze religion, because the Druze people are, so much whatever. And when you swear, you take an oath in the army, you get the sacred book of your faith, meaning I received the Bible, even though I the only thing I could do with the Bible is put it in the library and never touch it again. So So I was like, I was very much against this because I was afraid that this would strip my uniqueness away. This was how I would go there. And then while I was basically, in a tantrum, my goddess Hecate, and you who worship Hecate, you know that this is, what a powerful, difficult deity she is. She came to me and she told me, Arden, sweetie, you're going to go to the army. And I was like, but why? She told me, you're going to be perfectly safe. And like, I continued questioning her, so she turned her red eyes to me and told me, since when do you question me? So I was like backing off slightly, and I went through the process of joining the army. My entire family was there for my recruitment. And once I while I was crying, I was making my witch kit. I had an army witch kit. I have some remnants of here to show you, not too much. But this was the box. This is a heirloom box that I received from my brother-in-law. It's hand-carved. Frida is the name of his aunt. And it has this Aztec lining burnt to its side. I have no idea, and the key is lost. It had a key, it was lost. And inside, it has this, I hope you can see it, it has this beautiful wood ring, purple, silk lining. So this is where I kept some of my herbs. This is where I kept like frankincense resin and some camphor essential oils. And I collected my meager stuff that I had to do witchcraft with, which really wasn't much. I didn't have any of the main altar tools. I didn't take any of those to the army. I just took some herbs and some candles and some incense, basic essential things so I could give thanks to nature around me and be surrounded with good energy. I also took those, and those are actually the original one from the army. This is my tarot box for the army. You will notice that this is a trap box because I didn't want people messing with my stuff. You have to move this here before it opens. And my army tarot, it was a gift I bought for myself before of the army. This is the Tavaglione tarot, okay? Stairs of Gold, Tavaglione tarot. And those were challenging because they didn't have all the little paintings with the coins, and when you get to the coins, when you get to the minor arcana, it just shows you, for instance, you see here, it's like 8 of Cups. If you don't remember how the 8 of Cups looks like in the original Rider White, it's not the original. The Rider White ones are difficult to learn this, but this was a great tool to improving my memory because I would forget and like open the book every time I would forget. I was very young. I was 18. I'm now 32, so at least I'm going to be in the 10th of June. So congratulations, me. Anyway, so I took those and I kept them in a drawstring bag that was meant originally for flip-flops, and this was in my bag for the army. And once I've gotten to the boot camp, that's when my adventure really started. Forgive me, I'm drinking because it's a long tale. First of all, when they did the interview, I told them that I was a homosexual. I told them that I was a sorcerer. And basically the interviewer took me to the shrink that was on base back then. And the shrink asked me quite bluntly if I want to go to the army. And I said that I did, because that was after Hecate told me I have to recruit myself to the army. And he told me, okay, I'm going to lower your status so you won't go into any warrior type training and stuff. And I was okay with this because I really didn't want to be a warrior. Not that my body would allow me to be a warrior, but I didn't want to go and be a warrior and crap. Anyway, so I've gotten to the army and I got to boot camp. And in the beginning you have several months of boot camps, after which one will be assigned to its military base for further training or, start doing its job. And they told us quite early that we are going to be guards. We are going to be specific guards for specific bases. And that was great because the term meant that I would be a week on base and a week at home. and that meant that my service would be shortened to only meager 2 years, and I will have little to no reserve army duty, which I don't. I don't have any reserve duties. Nobody could summon me for reserve duties. I have a text that says that I'm, completely free from reserve duties nowadays. So anyway, I got to the boot camp and they split us out to teams. And I had this darling, sweet commanding officer as a team leader, which I will tell you more afterwards. And I discovered that being a witch in the army was a very gratifying experience, actually. It was surprising. I didn't expect that they would accept me in such open hands, okay? First of all, when the other people got time to make prayers in the synagogue, I got some time for meditation and prayer in nature. There was a giant eucalyptus tree on base next to my tent that was so old that there was this crevice, this giant cave-like crevice in the trunk. And I went and sat there and meditated there, and I gave offerings of frankincense and some essential oils. I couldn't burn anything there, and I didn't want to go against the rules, okay? So the incense was left basically unburnt. And people would trade things with me for tarot reading. Many people opened up to me almost immediately, telling, and really during my high school and during my preschool, I wasn't such a social butterfly. Not that I'm such a social butterfly today, okay? But people immediately opened up to me, and they traded, like, kitchen duties and guard duties. That was before I went to my stable base and be a guard. That I wouldn't change. For tarot readings and for services. And it was very much fun. Now back then, this was my Cunningham heyday. I did everything with herbs and crystals. I had a lot of mojo bags that I prepared. And one of the stories was that, there was some person in a band. I didn't keep in touch with him, sadly. It was before it was still the time where people used ICQ. I finished my army service in 2005, okay? And he was in the music industry. And he told me he really wanted to break up with the army station and have his song there. And I said, fine, I will make a charm for you. And I made a charm for whatever I had. And back then I believed that the herbs didn't matter and, I can do whatever I want. So I intuitively chosen some herbs and put them in a bag and charged it with my magic and told him to sleep with it beneath his bed. And next week he came back all excited, screaming in the tents because we were sleeping in tents. That, oh my God, we got our first gig in the radio. Arden did this. And, he stirred the entire camp and basically made a very good publicity for me. A publicity that did not die off until I managed to get stationed in my normal base. And even there, it wasn't stationed. So it wasn't over. So anyway, I think that in that boot camp, in 2003, I think 2003, 2004, that was when I was the most, that was the most embracing army, that was the most embracing pagan/witchcraft surrounding I ever had at that time. It was so accepting and people were so open-minded that I was shocked. For instance, I had this giant San Justine pentacle. Do you remember the San Justine company? That it was like one of the first one that would actually make silver pentacles. I had this giant one this big, and I got special permission to wear it on base, even though it was against regulation if I keep it beneath my clothes, for instance. And I wore it on basically a leather string that was also against regulation, and I would go with this, like, beneath my shirt and everything. I gave that away. I don't have that pentacle anymore, but I would, when I would have an item and I would finish it and fill it with energy, I would give it to someone else. So I don't have this to show you. I keep very little memorabilia nowadays, really. So anyway, once when we had to go and do, and practice our shooting in a shooting range, one of my commanding officer was shouting on someone else in the shooting range, and when she was shouting, her necklace got loose, and I saw that she had the triple goddess pentagram necklace. Now, please, if this was in the US, I would be like, fine. But this was in the Israeli army. Okay? In the Israeli army in 2004, 2005. Okay? Every trend that you have now in the US, you have to go back 20 years before you are getting to, how it's going to drop a little bit in Israel. You can't, like, completely fathom what's going on in Israel. But if you do, go to the US and minus 20 years. So we are talking about the 1980s back then. And that woman was wearing a triple goddess charm. Now, I couldn't ask her right away about this, but I asked her later. And she told me this was none of my business and I was rude, basically, and that she could punish me for this. She was my commanding officer, okay? Which she could and she would, but she didn't. And then I understood, basically, that I was picked to her team because she knew that I was a witch, and she was a witch too, and she wanted to make sure that I'm going to have a safe army service. And this is more like, Hecate, goddess, you work in mysterious ways. I didn't expect such a thing. That was a complete shock for me. It was a complete shock for me. I didn't expect this. This was such a wonderful surprise. And I had some other stories in boot camp, but let's move on to my actual service. Well, I was a guard. And as a guard and as a witch, I also always chose the hours that were between 2 and 6 in the morning. Because between 2 and 6 in the morning, I could have my peace and quiet and meditation time. This is where I actually read the big 3 books of occult philosophy by Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. And if you know that text, this text is humongous. And I was like, sitting there reading it, and people would come all over from the Krayot. I served in an army base that no longer exists, so I can tell you about it. It was called Matzlach Kurdani. Kurdani was a Turkish name. The army base was that ancient. And the British built most of it when they conquered here, and it even had a little remnants of the old Hijazian rail station. It was really serving on a piece of history. On a piece of neglectful, disgusting history, but yes. And there was another army base there that I won't talk about because I think this army base is still around. And this was in the middle of the Krayot, which is an urban city. It was a completely urban surrounded city. And my booth was, it's still, it was destroyed. It wasn't destroyed. It's still there. It's like still turned on the side on some road somewhere because the army sold this base to the Krayot, which used that place for development. Anyway, the entire Krayot, which is in the northern area of Israel, came to me between 2 and 6 in the morning to get a tarot reading for me and get my advice and listen to what I had to say. And this was bizarre, okay? This was, again, I would remind you, this was before Facebook, that was before YouTube, that was before everything. That was before, cable internet in Israel even. It was, the cable internet in Israel, the internet in Israel started in 1990s, but it was a privileged thing. Most people just started having this in the 2000s, 4 years before, or 3 years before. And it was such a shock. You know, I had this also primitive Nokia cell phone that got stolen from me later. It was such a shock that people all over wanted to come and see me and talk with me. And I wielded quite a lot of power in that base. I got slightly better food. I was befriended with the personnel there. I got whatever shift I wanted. Everything was just swell, okay? Really, everything was just swell, and I felt very much protected. And when I finished the army, I finished it with honors, as much as I could receive honors from just sitting in one place and doing nothing for my entire army service. I have all sorts of funny stories that has nothing to do with me being a witch. But for instance, one of those stories was a story about my wand, and I think I told it here in my wand videos, that my wand got broken, and after it got broken, it was an amethyst one that I felt so connected to. I buried this around the camp to protect it. I think that, you know, maybe some people are still finding shards of that one today if they dug any of them out. But also, you know, after I finished serving, many years later, I think it was like, okay, let me tell you when the thing was published. It was in 2010, meaning 5 years after I finished my army base, some girl came, you know, some girl that is reported in Bamachane. Bamachane is the Israeli army magazine. And she wrote, "Take that." That is religion in Hebrew, so it's a pun or a play of words. The pagan, the Krishnaid, and the Scientologist. The lives of soldiers that believe in different gods, okay? And they did an article that could about me and some other people. I don't know how she managed to find, you know, to hear the stories about me like 5 years later. But this is me in my army uniform. Okay, this is a picture that was originally taken by my brother-in-law. And this is the article. Okay, you see me, this is like in 2010, when, you know, she sent somebody to take a picture of me. This is me, you know, in my room performing a ritual. You've seen my room, it hasn't changed much. Still have those tools and everything, okay? So, you know, I got like the centerfold, basically. And it says, basically, you know, there is an entire story here. I'm not going to translate it for you. But it's basically, you know, an abridged version of what I told you. And she asked me in the end, do you think that they should have an army sorcerer? And I said, I think there already was one, and I think that there are probably many more sorcerers and witches that practice in the Israeli army. But, you know, and I had a good experience. Maybe they didn't have such understanding commanding officers or whatever. And, you know, it's such a unique, interesting piece of my history. And you know, I return to this with love, because this is when I discovered that this is what I need to be, that I need to be a witch. And I need not to hide myself, I need to be out there, and I need to service people. That was the place when this was revealed to me, basically. So that was it. That's mainly the story of me being in the army. And my advice for pagan and witches in the army: if you're going to the army, don't hide whom you are. You know, the system works better with things revealed than things hidden. And trust the goddess. She will take you wherever you need to go, basically. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that story. Goodbye and Asher.